Imagine standing in a place so big, so wild, and so full of promise that it felt like the edge of the known world. That's what the Carolina colony was in the 1600s. But here's the shocking part. Not everyone experienced that land the same way. From the very beginning, geography itself was pulling people apart. You see, the northern part of the colony was rugged, thick with forests, and separated from easy trade routes by treacherous coastline and shallow inlets. Settlers there lived tough, scraping out a living on small farms, working with their own hands, and depending on neighbors for survival. Meanwhile, farther south, the land opened up into fertile plains and easy access to ports. Ships sailed in and out, and that meant money, influence, and power. Two worlds existed inside one colony, and neither side could fully understand the other. Think about how human nature works. If you grow up in a place where everything feels hard, where every harvest depends on your sweat and every neighbor's help could mean the difference between surviving or starving, you see the world differently. That was the North. They were independent, stubborn, and proud of doing things their own way. Now imagine being in the South, where vast fields stretched to the horizon, where wealthy landowners built estates and tied their futures to global trade. For them, success meant scale, bigger plantations, bigger profits, bigger dreams. One side saw life as endurance, the other saw it as opportunity. Both were right in their own eyes, and both carried seeds of resentment toward the other. It's almost like watching two siblings raised under the same roof, but treated differently by life itself. One sibling struggles, fights for every inch, while the other seems to have resources pouring in, doors opening at every turn. Eventually, those siblings stop seeing eye to eye. That's what geography did to Carolina. It shaped two different personalities, two different visions, and set them on a path that could never really merge. What's powerful here is how geography teaches us about division in our own lives. Sometimes the place we are planted in, the conditions we face, create struggles that someone else might never truly grasp. And when those differences go unchecked, when no one tries to bridge the gap, those differences grow into walls. In Carolina, that wall was invisible at first, but it was real. Every shallow harbor that blocked trade in the north, every fertile rice field that bloomed in the south, it all whispered the same truth. This wasn't one united land. By the early 1700s, this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about identity. Northerners didn't just live differently. They thought differently, dreamed differently, and carried themselves with a different sense of pride. Southerners didn't just have money. They had a culture built on wealth, influence, and connections that the North couldn't touch. Two regions, born under the same banner, were already living as strangers. And that's the shocking root of why Carolina split. It wasn't just politics. It wasn't just kings or governors. It started with the ground itself, the rivers and forests and soil beneath their feet, carving two ways of life that could never walk the same path. What began as a single colony was already destined to fracture because geography had already told the story before anyone could write it. Picture these two groups of people living side by side, technically under the same colony, but their day-to-day lives looking like they belonged to completely different worlds. That's exactly what happened in Carolina. The land itself had drawn an invisible line, but it was the clash of economies that deepened the divide until it became impossible to ignore. In the north, people weren't running grand plantations or sending ships packed with goods across the ocean. They were small farmers planting tobacco or corn, raising a few animals, and surviving season by season. Their lives were simple, their profits modest, and most of what they earned went right back into their land, their families, and their survival. They didn't measure success in wealth or luxury, but in whether the family made it through another hard year. Now shift your focus to the south, and the story changes dramatically. The soil was richer, the rivers deeper, and the ports more welcoming to trade. Here, plantations stretched across acres, growing cash crops like rice and indigo that were in high demand overseas. These weren't small, family-run farms. They were massive operations powered by enslaved labor, turning out enormous profits. Wealthy landowners in the south weren't just farmers. They were businessmen plugged into global markets. Their lives revolved around expansion, status, and influence. They built estates, mingled with elites, and shaped their society around class and privilege. So what happens when one side is struggling to make ends meet while the other is cashing in on prosperity? The same thing that happens in families, in companies, in communities. Jealousy brews, resentment grows, and mistrust deepens. Northerners looked at the South and saw people who seemed spoiled by wealth, disconnected from the grit and grind of everyday living. Southerners looked at the North and saw people who were small-minded, backward, and unworthy of sharing equal power in the colony. Both sides were proud, and both sides believed their way of life was the right one. It's easy to underestimate how powerful economic differences can be in shaping human identity. Money changes the way people think, the way they act, the way they dream. For the North, a good year meant survival and maybe a little comfort. For the South, a good year meant luxury, influence, and the power to make decisions that echoed far beyond their borders. That kind of gap doesn't just create tension. It builds a wedge that can split a community in two. And here's the real shocker. Those economic differences didn't stay on the farms or in the markets. They seeped into politics, religion, and culture. In the South, wealth bought power, and the wealthy elite began to dominate decision making. They had the resources to influence laws, trade policies, and alliances. In the North, people resisted that kind of hierarchy. They didn't trust a government run by rich men who didn't understand the struggles of ordinary families. This wasn't just about crops, it was about control, about whose vision would define the future of Carolina. If you zoom out, it almost feels like a lesson written across history's pages. Whenever one group gains